realistic drills for draftees still in the Army. They man 16-inch guns guarding San Francisco Bay and fire at a target 12 miles out. The guns are hidden in the hills overlooking the Golden Gate, always ready and waiting.
These old bunkers and emplacements in the hills above the Golden Gate are just about all that's left to remind us that there was a time when the San Francisco Bay Area was called the Gibraltar of the Pacific. I'm Russ Coughlin, inviting you to re-explore a place that has almost vanished in a time that changed our lives forever. It was a period when Oakland and San Francisco swarmed with servicemen, a million passing through on the way to a war in the Pacific. And their goodbyes made a bar on the top of a hotel the most famous cocktail lounge in the world. A time when big stars led big bands, solid senders laying down a beat for hepcats and jitterbugs. For the first time, housewives became mechanics, waitresses turned into welders, and workers from all over America flooded into the Bay region. In just 3 years, the city of Vallejo tripled in size. Richmond quadrupled. The San Francisco Bay was turned into the world's greatest shipbuilding complex. And on a hilltop, the University of California campus in Berkeley, a highly secret project was underway. The result would change the course of history. This is the second in a series of 5 special programs, each a diary of the war years in the Bay Area.
Number Day in America's first peacetime compulsory military service program. And Paramount News records the historic scene. Chance and chance alone determines the order in which the 17 million registrants will be called. And from 9,000 carefully mixed numbers,
the first number drawn by the Secretary of War is serial number 158.
Number 158 in Oakland, California, laundry worker Kwang Kwang Fu. San Francisco and Senior Class President William Bernard Parliament. San Lorenzo and American-born Toshio Okado. At Palo Alto, John Kennedy, the ambassador's son, got the 18th number drawn. And as the lottery goes on for 17 hours, a mighty manpower is created.
Uncle Sam needed just about anyone or anything that he could get in the fall of 1940, because up till then, he didn't have very much. America was not just unprepared for war. The armed forces were pitiful. Fortune magazine took a look at American reservists in training and called this the worst equipped army in the world. Soldiers trained with wooden guns, mortars made of drain pipe, and beer can ammunition. Trainees had to go through make-believe battles that would have been laughable in a high school play. There weren't enough tanks for their war games, so trucks were used as stand-ins. But there weren't even many of those because the tactics were often dominated by horses. In size, the American Army ranked 18th in the world, just ahead of Bulgaria. But all of that was about to change. And here in California, that change would be both fast and overwhelming. The old Army arsenal at Benicia was retooled, expanded, and thrown into high gear. The Navy Yard at Mare Island added more workers, more Navy men, extra shifts, and Vallejo began to feel the very first pains of a boom in the making. Todd shipyards on the Oakland estuary and the Bethlehem yards in San Francisco were hiring again. Welders, machinists, riveters, pattern makers. And Army headquarters at the Presidio was a hive of activity. Fort Ord was being rapidly expanded. So was Hamilton Field. Even the old Naval Air Station at Sunnyvale was getting a new look. Moffett Field had been dedicated back in 1933, and that had been in the era of the great dirigibles. They did make an impressive showing over our cities in the 1930s, and lots of people thought that they were the wave of the future. The Navy had commissioned 2 lighter-than-air ships, the Akron, to be based on the East Coast, and the Macon, which would make its home here at Moffett. But the Akron crashed in the Atlantic just 8 days before this field opened. And when the Macon crashed in the Pacific off of Point Sur 2 years later, That finished off the Navy's airship program. But now, sailors were training here for a new kind of lighter-than-air assignment, flying blimps on the anti-submarine patrol off the California coast. Those enormous hangars had a practical use after all. All over Northern California, old forts and airfields were being reactivated. New training camps were springing up. Induction centers were taking in the first men who would be the shaved-tails, the grunts, and the dog faces of Uncle Sam's new armed forces. The Bay Area was becoming quite a different place. Perhaps nowhere was it more evident than right here at Treasure Island. Because here the transformation was taking place right on our own front yard. For 2 years, we had been beguiled by the World's Fair on this man-made piece of land. Its theme had been a pageant of the Pacific, emphasizing the brotherhood and cultural unity of all the peoples living on the shores of the Pacific. It was a grandiose imperial city built out of lath, burlap, and stucco. Only 3 buildings were permanent: 2 enormous aircraft hangars and the administration building, which after the fair was to be turned into an airline terminal. Because Treasure Island was to be made into San Francisco International Airport when the fair closed. In fact, it was used as an airport all during the fair. The great China Clippers had been flying passengers out of Alameda since 1936. And when the flights were moved to Treasure Island, the Clippers became one of the fair's great attractions. 18 hours to Honolulu, then on to Midway, Wake Island, Guam, and Manila. Then a change of planes and on to either Singapore or Macau and Hong Kong. About 6.5 days in all. Half boat and half plane. The Clippers had luxurious appointments. All meals were served on linen-covered tables with full china, crystal, and silver service. And for those who desired complete privacy, staterooms. There had never been planes like this before, and it's unlikely there ever will be again. On September 29, 1940, when the fair closed for the last time, it was already apparent that the pageant of the Pacific was an empty concept. The Pacific Basin wasn't a cultural entity. It was about to become a theater of war. Plans for turning Treasure Island into the airport for San Francisco were postponed. The Navy took it over as a temporary base. Well, before long, the Clippers would be painted gray. They would carry only military and government VIPs. And war would stop all of their flights beyond Hawaii. And now it was a different kind of aircraft that we were seeing over Bay Area skies. By 1941, the Bay Area was surrounded by airfields, and military planes were becoming a common sight. And yet, it was not the new bombers and fighters that would so radically change this region. The change that would come here had its beginning 4,000 miles away in the North Atlantic. England was calling for help, and they needed it badly. Not only weapons and food and supplies, but also the ships to carry them.
Give us the tools, and we will finish the job.
But America responded with Lend-Lease. It was a monumental program which sent vast convoys of ships, all loaded with arms and equipment, into the battle zones. And many were ships just like this. They called them Liberty ships. And more were made right here than anywhere else, because San Francisco Bay was turned into the greatest shipbuilding center that the world had ever seen. Right at the center of it all was an Oakland industrialist and builder, Henry J. Kaiser. His idea was to build ships in prefabricated sections on a kind of a giant assembly line. And to do it, he announced that the town of Richmond would be the site for his first big shipyard. 3 months after construction got underway, Kaiser announced that one wasn't enough, and he'd build a second big shipyard. And that, too, would be in Richmond. Before he was through, there would be 4 gigantic complexes for building ships. Meanwhile, the Richmond oil refineries were expanding. Already the 3rd largest in the world, they were now turning out aviation fuel and explosives and working on a new diesel oil for American submarines. The local Ford plant, the largest on the West Coast, had thrown quite a celebration on the day it turned out the 20 millionth Ford back in the 30s. 10 years later, that seemed almost quaint. The assembly lines had been retooled and sped up. Now it was Jeeps that came pouring out of the plant. And to make those Jeeps and process that oil and build those ships, new workers were flooding into Richmond. The squeeze was on in schools. Students began going in double shifts. The squeeze was on in housing. People were starting to rent house trailers, basements, and garages. Every city facility, from fire stations and libraries to the police department and garbage collection, was strained. And this was only the beginning. The middle-class little city that had been Richmond was fast disappearing. A preview of what would happen all around the San Francisco Bay. Suddenly, the world was catching up with us. But one remnant of the 1930s was still a part of our lives: the bitterness and distrust between labor and management. In the spring of 1941, AFL machinists walked off the job at 11 shipyards around the bay. 18,000 workers refused to cross the picket lines. Work stopped on 72 Navy ships, as well as British and American cargo vessels. For 6 weeks, the mood was tense and dangerous. But all of this was quickly changed, again, by events thousands of miles away in the Atlantic. In early June of 1941, Nazi U-boats began attacking that American supply line to Britain. And the first United States ship to fall victim to German torpedoes was called the Robin Moor. President Roosevelt declared, "History has recorded who fired the first shot, but all that will matter is who fired that last shot." Watching the bridges go up during the late 1930s, we knew that those towers would eventually be tombstones for the ferries. And sure enough, in February of 1941, the run from the Hyde Street Pier to Sausalito closed down. The rest of the system would suffer a 20-year death. But for the war years, boats like this remain very much a part of the life in San Francisco Bay. The trip to Oakland took 15 to 18 minutes. You could get to Berkeley in 24 minutes, or you could even catch a boat from the ferry building and go all the way to Vallejo, Richmond, Sausalito, or Alameda. 100,000 people streamed through the ferry building every day. And with defense industries burgeoning all around the bay, the ferries had been given a reprieve. The train stations were bustling too. Each railroad's corporate pride and reputation still rode on the luxury, dependability, and the speed of the streamliners that roared up and down the coast and across the continent. They had glamorous names: the Shasta Daylight, the Overland Limited, the 49er, the Cascade Limited, the Del Monte Express, the City of San Francisco. But now, more and more of the passengers were soldiers and sailors. Entire troop trains were rolling into the Bay Area now. San Francisco was becoming the city of goodbye. And that made a cocktail lounge on top of a hotel on Nob Hill the most famous bar of its time. The Top of the Mark opened up in 1939. By 41, it was becoming the accepted place for servicemen's farewells. The bartenders were called bombardiers, and men in uniform got the first drink free, and everyone swore that when they got back, they'd meet right here at the Top of the Mark. Well, as it turned out, some wouldn't make it back. But hey, in 1941, we were all still optimists. Opening day for yachtsmen brought out the biggest turnout that the Bay had seen in years. Some saw that as ultimate proof that the Great Depression was over and buried. Artists had a big turnout that summer, too, on streets in the shadow of Coit Tower. It was the first big curbside exhibition of art in America, an idea that some local artists had brought home when the Nazis chased them out of Paris. When they threw their artisan models ball, the painters and sculptors made it very clear how they felt about the Axis. The theme of their 1941 party was Heal Hitler. Big-time tennis had a whole troupe of stars from the Bay Area in 1941. Helen Wills. Raised in Alameda, she won 7 American and 8 Wimbledon championships. Don Budge from Oakland. He won the Grand Slam, the Australian, the British, the French, and the United States championships. Alice Marble of San Francisco, ranked #1 in tennis for 5 years. The United States government had already secretly recruited her to spy on the Nazis. Another kind of Bay Area champ retired that year: Seabiscuit, the ugly duckling racehorse owned by San Francisco auto magnate C.S. Howard. Seabiscuit had gone from Bay Meadows and Tan Ferran to become undisputed king of American tracks. Now, he would go to pasture in Willits. But there's still plenty of local turf action. The $2 million Golden Gate Fields in Albany had opened just the year before. And in an era when no well-dressed lady left the house without hat and gloves, the track was as good a place as any to check out the 1941 fashions. For a somewhat younger generation, bobby socks were in. And so was a young singer with the Tommy Dorsey Band named Frank Sinatra.
Until I smile at you.
Pop songs of that whole decade, from the mid-30s to the mid-40s, were solidly based on the swing music of the big bands. There were two basic styles. One was sweet, the other was hot. The sweet bands played the hotel circuit in ballrooms like this, the Peacock Court of the Hotel Marcopias. And when you listen to their radio broadcast, it all seems so terribly, terribly sophisticated and very romantic.
There's something in the atmosphere here at Peacock Court that makes it the rendezvous of smart, pleasure-loving people from all parts of the world. They come to dance a night away, captivated by the spirit of camaraderie and the haunting melodies of this rare music at the Hotel Mark Hopkins.
The hot bands? Well, you were more likely to find them in theaters, nightclubs, or dance halls like the Avalon or Wallahan's, El Patio, and in Oakland's Sweets Ballroom, the Alabama and the Sands, or the Coconut Grove in Santa Cruz. This was not music for the meek or the discreet. In the teenage jargon of the day, this righteous jive put the cats in a groove to cut a rug. There were big dances at the military bases, too. Busloads of young women arrived every weekend at Fort Ord on chaperone trips organized by the San Francisco Citizens Hospitality Committee. In March of 1941, Bob Hope entertained the troops for the first time. That same month, Jimmy Stewart joined the Army Air Corps as a buck private. Lots of other movie stars and sport figures would follow. By that summer, the style setters were wearing uniforms. Now, the question was not whether we would be in the war, but when. Just a year before, the new Japanese ambassador, Admiral Nomura, had arrived in San Francisco on his way to Washington. His message? Japan's only interest was peace with America. And now, in 1941, a new special envoy flew into San Francisco aboard the Clipper, Mr. Sabaru Kurusu.
Gentlemen, you all know how difficult my mission is, but I'll do all I can to make it a successful one for the sake of two countries, Japan and the United States.
But Imperial Japan was making no secret of its military strength, nor of its ambitions to control all of Asia. What was not clear to most Americans was how far into the Pacific those ambitions would reach. Meanwhile, tons of Axis propaganda was confiscated in San Francisco. Japanese steamers had been bringing it in at the rate of 10 tons a week. Now it was seized and burned. That was probably unconstitutional, but in the late summer of '41, no one was objecting. Then, in the fall, a more ominous event.
1,000 citizens of Japan crowd a San Francisco dock, their life in America interrupted by curt orders from Tokyo. Japan's Foreign Office says the Pacific is on the verge of war and calls the Emperor's children home. The evacuees board a luxury liner. The liner Tatuta Maru is in American waters for perhaps the last time, as new clouds rumble over the ocean that today is turbulent, though named Pacific.
The reactivated coastal guns above the Golden Gate were fired again, probably more as a show of strength than for practice. The anti-submarine net was stretched all the way across the Golden Gate. The wire mesh could be opened by surface vessels to let friendly ships in and out. The net was in restraint of trade, clearly illegal, but no questions were asked. And on November 28, 1941, the Lurleen sailed from San Francisco bound for Honolulu. The decks crowded with passengers in a holiday mood. Sure, the situation in the Pacific was tense, but Honolulu was a long way from Tokyo, and everyone knew that no place could be more safe than Hawaii. After all, America's Pacific strength was concentrated right there, at Pearl Harbor.
Every tourist knows Diamond Head and Waikiki, but now beaches are studded with pillboxes, anti-invasion defenses. Pearl Harbor, the world's greatest naval base. Pearl Harbor is 3,400 miles from Yokohama, and Pacific Fleet Commander Admiral Kimmel keeps all hands on the alert.
So, when the Lurleen docked in Honolulu on December 3rd, 1941, the vacationing passengers felt as secure as they had back home in the Bay Area. There were all the exotic Hawaiian sights, and on the edge of town, Waikiki Beach with its 2 hotels. Downtown Honolulu was bustling now with servicemen, but it was still small and compact as cities go. Friday morning, December 5th, the Lurleen set sail again, homeward bound for San Francisco. It was the usual festive sailing, flower lays, ukulele music, kids diving for coins off the bow. When the Aloha Tower disappeared, the 700 passengers settled down for the pleasant 6-day cruise back to the mainland. The next night, as they danced in the ship's lounge, over the horizon, a Japanese armada was maneuvering into attack position. And just as those last Lurleen passengers were closing up the bar, planes were warming up on the decks of those Japanese carriers. I'm Russ Coughlin.
This exclusive Channel 7 miniseries, Remembrance of War Bay Area, will resume next May with new episodes documenting life in the San Francisco region during World War II.